Hey everybody, Chris Serino here with Sultana Education Foundation's virtual classroom. You can see I have a shot of the beautiful schooner Sultana under sail, and Sultana historically sailed around in the 18th century patrolling and searching for smugglers that were carrying goods from all different parts of the globe into the Chesapeake Bay. I'm going to be showing you a world map, and we're going to talk today a little bit about the triangle trade and the system of trade in general that was happening in the 1700s. So here's a world map, and let's start by identifying the major continents that we can see on this map. Here we have North America, and if you look really carefully, the Chesapeake Bay is right here. Maryland and Virginia are labeled here on the map. Here's the Carolinas. So here's North America. South of North America, of course, you have South America. So here's the northern sort of tip of South America. Moving across the ocean, we have the continent here of Africa. And then above that, we have the continent of Europe. So on the map, here's Ireland, here's Great Britain, so England is right in this area. And then in between these continents, we have the Atlantic Ocean. You can see here it says the Atlantic or Western Ocean. So the Atlantic was often called the Western Ocean at this time period. One interesting thing you'll see in the ocean are all of these things. These are different compass roses, and if you follow my finger around the map, you'll see they're laid out basically in a circular pattern. So these compass roses were put strategically in locations where sailors would be following what's called the North American gyre. It's essentially a large circular tidal pattern that would carry ships around in this manner. In the 18th century, each one of these continents produced a good or goods that were very profitable, but no one continent was producing all of the goods they needed to be self-sufficient. So here we have the 13 colonies. In the 1700s, three major trade products that were coming out of the Chesapeake region were wheat, tobacco, and corn, which will be represented by these objects. Now, further south, there were other things like tobacco and indigo, but for the purpose of this exercise, let's focus on our area: corn, tobacco, and wheat. Over here in Europe, these are societies that have been in place for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They had a lot of manufactured goods that we weren't yet making in America. So that's what these represent. This is a pewter button, a belt buckle, and of course, some of your finer wines come from this region. Now, from the continent of Africa, the number one commodity, unfortunately, was human beings. This is an overhead look at the hold of the slave ship Brooke from 1788. So Africans were often captured, marched overland to ports here on the west coast of Africa, and then traded as commodities to markets all around this system. And lastly, down here in the Caribbean area, you have these warm climates, and the number one export was sugar. Sugar was grown all around these islands and in the northern latitudes of South America. A lot of times when you hear about trading in the 1700s, it's referred to as the triangle trade. So I'll show you one way that might have worked out. So let's say your ship starts in Europe. You might leave Europe with manufactured goods like belt buckles and buttons, but you also might leave with things like weapons and trade with merchants in Africa for slaves who would then be transported across the Atlantic. This is called the Middle Passage, and they might end up in the Chesapeake region and trade slaves for tobacco, something which was really being grown in large quantities, and then come back to Europe with a boatload of tobacco. You're coming back with a product that's incredibly valuable and that's not locally grown. So that made the shape of a triangle. Another trade that wasn't part of really the triangle trade, but that was very prevalent in the Chesapeake region is, this is an area where they're growing a lot of food, a lot of corn and wheat. Now down here, they're growing sugar. Sugar was so valuable that the farmers down here didn't want to waste land on foodstuffs that they could simply trade for. So what a lot of merchants here in the Chesapeake region would do is they would leave the Chesapeake. They'd have to go against the Gulf Stream here, and they would trade foodstuffs for an exotic product like sugar, or a byproduct of sugar called molasses, and then come directly back to the bay. That's a way a lot of merchants here in North America made a real killing. So I think you could probably see there's a million different variations you can make with trade routes here on the Atlantic, but the main ideas are they're following the North Atlantic gyre, and there are also trade winds that follow these currents. There's raw materials coming out of North America from the colonies. There's manufactured goods coming out of Europe. The most valuable product, unfortunately, coming out of Africa were human beings or slave labor, and then sugar and molasses were really big exports coming out of the Caribbean. And in addition to the slave trade, I would just want to add the whole sugar industry and a lot of these big plantations were completely reliant on slave labor to become profitable. And in addition to trading for people, of course, when people are moving from continents to other continents, they're bringing with them cultures and ideas and different political beliefs and different diets. And so it's a massive cultural exchange in addition to an exchange made to make profit. So that's a brief, quick introduction to trade in the 18th century. We could go on for hours about this. Hopefully you got a little bit out of this, and you can read a little bit more about this in your history textbooks. That's all for today's lesson on Sultana Education Foundation's virtual classroom. Hope you'll join us for more cool videos.